Welcome to Conspiracist. Today we're going to dive into something pretty significant. The idea, the hypothesis really, that governments might have intentionally hidden evidence of their agendas within the media.
That's right. It's a heavy topic. We've looked at a range of material covering things like media bias, propaganda techniques, even specific conspiracy theories, and also media literacy.
And our goal here, just to be clear up front, is to evaluate the arguments, the reasoning behind this hypothesis as objectively as we can. We want to keep this professional and analytical.
Absolutely. So maybe we should start by just clarifying what we mean by these terms.
Good idea. What are hidden agendas in this specific context?
Well, we're talking about underlying goals, right? Objectives that aren't usually stated out loud, but could definitely influence what the media, and that's, newspapers, TV, online sources, the whole spectrum puts out there.
And the key part of the hypothesis is intentional concealment.
Exactly. It implies a deliberate effort, not just accidental bias, but actively suppressing information or maybe misrepresenting it, holding something back on purpose.
Okay, so let's look at the evidence proponents often point to. There are historical examples, aren't there, where governments clearly influence the media.
Oh, definitely. Our sources bring up things like the Committee on Public Information, the CPI during World War I in the U.S.
Right. They were actively working to shape how people felt about the war.
Yeah, pushing specific stories, encouraging a certain kind of press coverage, even censorship to some extent. It was a very deliberate campaign to build support.
And didn't that kind of backfire later to some degree?
Well, yes. Afterwards, when some of the atrocity stories turned out to be exaggerated or false, it led to significant public distrust. It showed how these government-backed narratives could be, well, not entirely accurate.
We also saw film being used pretty strategically during wars, didn't we?
For sure. Both in World War I, with government bodies producing films, and then in World War II, even Hollywood got involved, making films to boost morale, explain alliances, that sort of thing. Propaganda, essentially.
And it's not just history from a century ago. There are more recent examples cited, too.
Yeah, like the U.S. paying Iraqis after the invasion to publish articles written by U.S. troops, but making them look like they came from local Iraqi journalists.
That definitely blurs the lines. Makes you wonder about the source of information.
It does. And then you have the really overt examples from, say, Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, where the state completely controlled the media to push ideology and justify actions. Total control.
Even in democracies, though, you see things like government-produced posters aimed at influencing public views on social issues or political campaigns. Specific examples come up in the research.
Right. So these historical cases, they span different times, different systems, but they do show governments can influence media, and sometimes do influence media, to push an agenda. It sets a kind of baseline, a historical precedent.
Okay, so that's the historical backdrop. What about today? Because the sources suggest there's a lot of concern now about bias and agendas.
There absolutely is. You see polling data showing really low trust in news media. And a big reason people give is this perception of bias, of spin, of hidden agendas.
A feeling that powerful people, maybe politicians or corporations, are using the media to push their own interests.
Exactly that feeling. It seems quite widespread, this idea that it's not just about reporting facts anymore for some outlets. And you see this playing out in how people view media in places like the US and the UK. Outlets are seen as taking sides, contributing to polarization.
People complain about things like not calling out lies, or maybe holding back certain information, or even creating a false balance between viewpoints when one is clearly inaccurate.
Yeah, all those criticisms surface. And some data actually maps this out, showing how certain online news sources tend to attract overwhelmingly liberal or conservative audiences, reinforcing those divides.
There's even mention of perceptions among some groups, like left-leaning people in the UK, feeling there's almost a conspiracy between conservative politicians and media owners.
Right, which ties into the whole issue of media ownership and funding.
How does ownership play into this, according to the sources?
Well, the concern is that if media outlets rely heavily on funding from specific industries or wealthy donors or even governments in some cases, those funders might influence the coverage. They might push certain narratives or make sure inconvenient facts get downplayed.
So the money trail could lead to a kind of imposed viewpoint.
That's the argument. Consolidation of ownership is another worry. Fewer owners controlling more outlets could mean less diversity in perspectives. And then you have direct government intervention sometimes.
Like what?
Well, the example given was government directives to social media platforms like Twitter, now X, about moderating certain content, especially around things considered matters of national interest. It shows that governments can, and sometimes do, try to shape the information flow directly.
It feels like we're circling back to that idea of shaping the narrative, even if it's not outright censorship.
Precisely. And that connects to the agenda-setting theory in mass communication.
Ah, yes, the idea that the media doesn't necessarily tell us what to think, but rather what to think about.
Exactly. By choosing which stories to cover and how prominently they influence what issues the public sees as important. Research going back decades shows correlations between media coverage of issues and what voters emphasize.
So if the media focuses heavily on issue A, the public starts thinking issue A is the most critical thing.
Generally, yes. Studies have shown pretty strong correlations across different types of news outlets, newspapers, TV news. They tend to agree on what the big stories are, and that consensus shapes public focus.
And the flip side of that is omitting things.
Yes, that's seen as a key tactic. If you want to push a certain agenda, simply not covering topics that contradict it or giving them minimal attention can be very effective, leaving things out.
Which I suppose leads us pretty naturally into the realm of conspiracy theories.
It does, because many conspiracy theories are essentially hypotheses about hidden agendas and large-scale concealment, often involving governments or other powerful groups.
You see them about everything, right? Historical events like the moon landing or JFK's assassination, ongoing things like flat earth theories, or even newer ones about, health directives or election outcomes.
The sheer number and variety of these theories suggests that, for a segment of the population at least, there's a readiness to believe that powerful entities are manipulating things behind the scenes. It could be seen as a symptom of deeper distrust.
And social media seems to pour fuel on that fire.
Absolutely. The speed and reach of social media platforms make it incredibly easy for these theories and just general misinformation to spread like wildfire. Algorithms can create echo chambers where these ideas just get amplified and reinforced.
And sometimes these beliefs have real-world consequences, don't they?
They certainly can. We've seen examples related to public health crises or political events where actions taken by individuals were directly linked to beliefs rooted in conspiracy theories spread online.
So, if we assume, for the sake of argument, that intentional concealment is happening, how might it be done? What are the mechanisms?
Well, classic propaganda techniques are often mentioned. Things like the bandwagon effect, everyone believes this, or creating scapegoats to blame for problems, using fear and uncertainty, employing vague but positive-sounding language, glittering generalities.
Basically manipulating emotions and psychology.
Right. And language itself is crucial. Word choice, metaphors, how a story is framed. These can subtly steer an audience's interpretation without them even realizing it. It's about controlling the narrative.
Controlling the flow of information, too, presumably. Deciding what gets released and when.
Yes, selective release is key. And creating false associations linking unrelated things together to create a desired impression. One of the tricky things with propaganda, too, is figuring out who's actually behind it.
How so?
Because the real source might be hidden. It could be put out through what seems like an independent group or organization up front. To conceal the propagandist's true identity and motives makes it harder to evaluate critically.
Okay, but we need to bring in the counter-arguments, too. It can't all be manipulation, surely.
No, and the sources do highlight the professional standards that many journalists adhere to principles, like verifying information, using reliable sources, trying to be accurate and fair.
And maybe the decline in trust isn't just about hidden agendas. Could it be partly because there's just so much more information available now from so many different places?
That's a point raised, yes. The sheer volume and diversity of news might naturally lead people to be more skeptical, maybe more confused, and it highlights the need for better news literacy skills rather than proving widespread deception.
What about the idea of truth? Is it always clear-cut in media?
Well, that's another nuance. Beyond getting the basic facts right, how those facts are interpreted and framed can differ. What one person sees as objective reporting, another might see as biased. This subjectivity doesn't automatically mean there's a hidden agenda. It could just be different perspectives.
So it comes back to critical thinking, being able to analyze the information yourself.
Absolutely. Media literacy is presented as vital understanding how media works, recognizing bias, spotting propaganda techniques, checking sources. Source criticism is a fundamental skill here.
Is there any consensus on reliability? Like fact checkers?
Interestingly, yes. Some research suggests that when you account for slight differences in rating scales, established fact-checking organizations actually tend to agree quite highly on whether something is true or false. That offers some level of independent verification.
And what about corporations? Sometimes they push social causes. Is that always an agenda?
The sources suggest it's complex. A corporation might support a social cause that aligns with its brand image or customer base without it necessarily being part of some deeper manipulative plot, especially if it doesn't challenge their core economic model. It might just be good business or PR.
So figuring out the intent behind a news story, whether it's actually meant to harm or mislead, is really difficult.
Extremely difficult to do objectively and quantify. And we have historical precedents, like yellow journalism, where media sensationalize things for sales, not necessarily because of a hidden government plot. The motives can be varied.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've looked at the hypothesis, governments intentionally concealing media agendas.
We have. We've seen historical examples where governments definitely did influence media. We see modern public concern about bias, ownership, and agendas, which is very real.
And we see conspiracy theories reflecting that distrust spread rapidly by new technologies. We've also looked at the potential tools, propaganda, language, information control.
But we also have the counterpoints. Journalistic standards, the complexity of truth, the need for media literacy, and the difficulty in proving intentional, widespread concealment versus other factors like bias, commercial pressures, or just differing perspectives.
So while there's definitely evidence of government influence at times and legitimate concerns about media bias exist, proving a massive, ongoing, intentional conspiracy by governments to hide agendas through the media, that remains quite challenging based on the sources we reviewed.
It does. The evidence points more towards specific instances, potential influences, and widespread perceptions of agendas, rather than conclusive proof of a universal, deliberate governmental concealment strategy across the board.
Which really underscores the need for all of us, for you listening, to be critical consumers of information.
Absolutely. Questioning sources, understanding potential biases, seeking out diverse perspectives, those skills are more important than ever in navigating the information landscape we live in today.
A complex picture indeed. Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.